He stood alone in the dim office, his hand trembling around the resignation letter he never expected to find. The lamp on Maya's empty desk cast a soft, uneven glow, as if even the light was unsure how to fill the space she'd left behind. Papers lay untouched, her cardigan draped neatly over the chair, quiet signs of a woman who had always moved through the world with care. Outside, the city kept humming, indifferent, but inside that room, something in him sagged, like a beam finally giving under years of weight. For a man who built his life on control, the silence around him felt like a verdict. He had followed rules, drawn lines, convinced himself he was unshakable. Yet here he was frozen, hurting over the absence of a woman he had never meant to let matter. And the hardest part wasn't the letter itself. It was the question rising in his chest, sharp and undeniable. What did I do to make her walk away? If you've ever realized too late what someone meant to you, this story may feel familiar. Let's begin. The office was dark, except for one lamp glowing at the far end of the executive floor. Its light pooled across a single polished desk, throwing soft reflections onto the glass wall behind it. Ethan Ward stood at the edge of that pool of light, shoulders tight beneath his wool coat, a folded letter resting in the center of his palm. He hadn't turned on any other lights since he found it. The quiet felt almost personal. He stared at the neat handwriting on the front. His name, nothing more, no flourish, no hesitation, just Ethan Ward. He traced the edges with his thumb, feeling a faint tremble there, one he hadn't noticed in years. His breath left him slowly, as though the air had thickened around him. The floor around him was silent. Past 9 p. Everyone had already gone home. The entire building seemed to be holding its breath. He turned slightly, looking toward the desk where he'd found the envelope. Maya's workspace was painfully organized, as if she had cleaned each surface with intention before she walked out. Her pen lay parallel to the notepad. Her favorite mug, blue ceramic with a tiny chip near the rim, was washed and placed upside down to dry. A soft cardigan in muted green was folded on her chair. It struck him then, harder than he wanted to admit, this didn't look like someone stepping out for the night. It looked like someone saying goodbye. He opened the letter. The first line was simple. Mr. Ward, I am resigning effective immediately. No explanations, no grievances, no accusation, even though she had every right to give one. The elegance of her words, the restraint, the dignity, it tightened something in his chest. She thanked him for the opportunity, wished the team well, signed her name with the same steady confidence she carried into every room. Maya Lewis. Just the sight of her name made his throat tighten. He sank into her chair, not his, and let the letter rest on his knee. The leather was still faintly warm. He leaned forward, elbows on his thighs, head bowed low. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of his own breathing and the soft hum of the building's HVAC system. He had no idea how long he sat like that. Seconds, minutes. Time felt off, stretched thin by disbelief. He lifted the letter again, reading the words slower this time. The emptiness between the lines weighed more than the content itself. She hadn't justified her decision, hadn't tried to soften the impact. That wasn't like her. Maya didn't walk away quietly. She walked with intention. Something must have pushed her there. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the city lights scattered across the dark like distant fires. Manhattan pulsed far below, unaware of the small world collapsing in this executive suite. His heartbeat kicked once, hard, against his ribs. 2 weeks. She'd been here barely 2 weeks. 2 weeks of order shifting in ways he didn't expect. 2 weeks of her voice grounding meetings, her presence steadying him through long afternoons he never admitted were lonely. 2 weeks of noticing the way she carried herself, confident but not arrogant, warm but never unprofessional. 2 weeks of catching himself looking up just to see her walk in with her planner tucked against her side. He didn't know when it started, this quiet pull he tried so hard to ignore. He only knew it had become impossible to deny. He pressed his thumb to his temple. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him, not now. Not after all the years he'd spent perfecting distance clean. Controlled, unbreakable distance. He exhaled slowly. He didn't understand why losing her felt like a door slamming shut inside his own chest. His mind drifted to the first moment he saw her. The memory arrived uninvited, her stepping into his office 2 weeks earlier, the light catching on the soft curls pulled back from her face, the calm confidence she carried like a second skin. She had looked at him without flinching, without shrinking, without adjusting herself to fit into the narrow spaces people often created around him. He hadn't realized until now how rare that was. He looked down again at her final line. "I won't take more of your time." It read like she believed she never mattered. His jaw tightened. A faint echo of her voice brushed his memory, gentle, steady. The way she said his name during their first meeting. The same calm when she quietly questioned a decision he made. The same calm when she stood her ground after he snapped at her. She didn't match the cold efficiency of his world. She softened it. Or maybe she exposed what had grown hard inside him. "What did I do?" he whispered. The words left him before he could stop them. They trembled in the dim air, fragile and too honest. What did he do? Or what didn't he do? He sat back slowly, feeling the weight of the chair beneath him. The door of his own office, across the hall, stood slightly ajar. A strip of light spilled across the carpet like a path he didn't know how to follow. The building creaked faintly, the way old steel does when it settles for the night. His shoulders dropped. Fatigue pulled at him, but it wasn't the kind that came from long hours. It was older, deeper, rooted in something he couldn't name. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to steady his breath. The silence pressed closer. Somewhere deep inside, a truth stirred, a truth he wasn't ready to face. But it moved anyway, slow and disruptive, like the first crack in ice. Losing her hurt, and the worst part was, he didn't yet know why. He folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. His hand lingered there, pressing lightly against the fabric. The office suddenly felt colder. He rose to his feet, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood in the doorway of her small workspace, staring at the empty chair, the folded cardigan, the stillness she left behind. A quiet question formed in the back of his mind, unsettling and sharp. What happened in those 2 short weeks to make her walk away? And why did it feel like something in him had walked out with her? He didn't have the answers. Not yet. Maya Lewis walked into his office with a calmness that made it seem as though she had been there before. The door eased shut behind her, and for a moment, Ethan forgot he'd been mid-sentence, reviewing numbers on a tablet he no longer cared to look at. Morning light filtered across the steel-gray carpet, catching the soft waves of her hair and the quiet confidence in the way she held her planner. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply existed in the room in a way that shifted its balance. "Ms. Lewis," he said, standing because something in him insisted on it. His voice came out steadier than he felt. She crossed the room with measured steps, offering her hand warm, firm, grounded. He shook it, but a subtle jolt traveled through him before he pulled back. Her presence was different, not loud, not demanding, just unmistakable. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said. Her tone carried a level clarity that made him straighten slightly. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat." As she settled in, the light lavender of her blouse softened the edges of his stark, monochrome office. He caught himself noticing the curve of her shoulder, the way her posture carried ease rather than effort. And he forced his gaze back to the resume in his hand. Exceptional. Harvard. Years of leadership experience. Languages, awards, references so strong his assistant had double-checked them. Yet none of that felt like the reason the room had changed the moment she entered it. He placed the resume down. "You're overqualified for an executive assistant role." "I'm aware," she replied, without a hint of arrogance. "Then why apply here?" She met his eyes, really met them, without flinching, Because I'm looking for a different kind of challenge. What kind, he asked, leaning back slightly. The kind that requires precision, she said, folding her hands in her lap. The kind that demands excellence without disguising it as kindness. You run your company with discipline, Mr. Ward. I want to work somewhere that doesn't pretend otherwise. He blinked. It was rare for anyone to speak to him this directly, even rarer for it to feel refreshing. I've heard about your leadership style, she added, her voice still calm but unmistakably bold. And what did you hear? He didn't intend the question to sound so sharp, but it did. She didn't waver. That you lead with rigor instead of noise. That you don't show your hand, but you always play it with intention. He studied her for a moment. Most applicants tried to flatter him with surface-level praise. But she had studied him, not his reputation, not his power, but the pattern beneath it. You think you can handle working with me? He asked. I don't handle authority, she said softly. I collaborate with it. Something inside him shifted subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. He felt it like a tight wire pulling in his chest. He cleared his throat once, needing the grounding. You understand this role can be demanding? I know exactly what it requires, she said. Structure, attentiveness, foresight. Her eyes softened just slightly, and the willingness to stay steady in rooms where others lose their footing. He wasn't sure if she meant his boardroom or his presence. Either way, the words struck a part of him he hadn't accessed in years. And why leave your previous position? He asked. She took a quiet breath. Sometimes a place holds you to who you were, not who you've become. He stilled. There was a weight beneath that sentence, one she didn't elaborate on. She didn't have to. It lingered in the air between them. He should have continued the formal questions, should have moved with his usual precision, but his mind drifted, noticing her steadiness, the curve of her silhouette, the composure that didn't ask for permission to exist. He caught himself staring and looked away quickly. Your credentials are impressive? So, I've been told, she said gently. But credentials don't matter if you don't bring the right presence into a room. And what presence do you bring? The question slipped out before he could filter it. Her smile was small but assured, the kind that doesn't shrink around authority. The shift inside him deepened this time, unmistakable. He sat straighter, as if the air around him had changed temperature. The way she said it wasn't combative. It wasn't flirtatious. It was simply the truth of someone who knew exactly who she was. He felt something stir, disruption threaded with attraction, curiosity tangled with caution, feelings he didn't like, feelings he didn't want, but they were there. He closed her resume. When can you start? Her brows lifted slightly, though her posture didn't change. He realized he'd hired her without consulting HR, without thinking through the implications, without doing what he always did, control every variable. Tomorrow, she said. He nodded once, unable to withdraw the impulse that had already taken root. Good. She rose from the chair. He stood too, unable to stop himself. She extended her hand again. He hesitated only a second before taking it. Her grip was steady, certain. Thank you. Mr. Ward, she said softly. He watched her walk toward the door, her silhouette framed in morning light. A quiet certainty settled in his chest, one that both unsettled and intrigued him. As the door clicked shut, he let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What would this woman change in his world, and why did he already sense it was something he wasn't prepared for? Maya adjusted the lamp on his desk, angling it just slightly, and for the first time in months. Ethan's headache eased. He didn't want to admit it. The light had always bothered him too harsh, too white, but he had lived with it, the way he lived with most discomfort, silently, rigidly, as if endurance were a virtue. Now, with one small motion, she had changed it, and changed something in him. Oh. He watched her closely as she stepped back, her expression thoughtful, almost analytical. You spend long hours here, she said quietly. You shouldn't strain your eyes. She didn't wait for approval. She didn't look nervous about making an adjustment in the office. People usually entered like a shrine. She just moved on, opening his planner and sliding a few color-coded tabs into place, her handwriting clean, graceful, marked 3 meetings he'd been dreading, somehow, next to her careful notes. Even the tense board session at noon looked survivable. He cleared his throat. "You're reorganizing everything. Only what needs it," she replied. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was practical. She flipped another page, shifting a call he never wanted to take from Tuesday morning to Wednesday afternoon. She didn't ask permission, she simply made a better choice. He frowned. "You shouldn't move that." She met his eyes. "You've ignored that call for 3 days. His jaw tightened. "That isn't your concern. It affects your schedule," she said softly. "Which is my concern." The way she said it, calm, unshaken, made him look away. He reached for a stack of reports, trying to reassert distance, but his eyes drifted back to her anyway. Something about her steadiness felt intrusive, not because she was overstepping, but because she was right, and he hated being seen through that easily. She moved to open the blinds next. He stiffened. "Leave those. The glare worsens your migraines," she said, pausing only to confirm the angle. "This way, you'll still get natural light." He didn't know how she knew. No one else noticed when he rubbed the bridge of his nose or closed his eyes during particularly bright afternoons. But she saw it in 2 days. She always noticed the things he didn't want noticed. It unsettled him more than he could admit. A few minutes later, she stood by the edge of the desk, notebook tucked to her side. "Before your lunch with the advisory team, do you want me to send a summary of the revised projections?" He glanced at the notes she had prepared that morning, concise, organized, better than anything he'd received in months. "Yes," he said. "Send it." She nodded, turning to leave the room. He should have let her go. Should have allowed the quiet efficiency to continue unbroken. But the simmering tension, the strange friction between being seen and being exposed, caught up to him. "Next time," he said sharply, "ask before you rearrange my schedule." She stopped, slowly turned. Her face remained composed, but her eyes held something new. Not fear, not irritation, a kind of quiet disappointment that cut deeper. "Of course," she said in a low voice. "If that's what you prefer." The softness of her tone made him feel as though he'd stepped over a line without realizing it. A flicker of heat rose in his chest, not anger, but discomfort with himself. He hated that he'd sounded harsh, hated that she had reason to look at him that way. He heard her footsteps move toward the doorway. Something in him tightened. "Maya?" She paused. He hadn't used her first name until now. When she turned to face him, he felt the words lodge in his throat. He hadn't apologized to anyone, and he didn't even remember. Years, at least. Apologies weakened authority. Apologies cracked the armor. Apologies required admitting fault. But the tension hanging in the room wouldn't let him stay silent. "I shouldn't have snapped," he said, the words stiff, awkward, almost foreign in his mouth. "You weren't wrong." Her expression shifted subtle, softening at the edges. She walked back a few steps, meeting his gaze. "I wasn't trying to overstep," she said. "I was trying to help." He nodded once. "I know." She studied him for a moment longer, and he felt strangely bare under that gaze, as if she saw past the suits, the routines, the walls he'd spent years constructing. She didn't fill the silence that followed. She just stood there, present, steady, unmoving. It was unnerving and oddly comforting. He looked down at the papers on his desk, suddenly unable to read a single line. "The lights, the way you adjusted them," he added quietly, almost reluctantly. It helped. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not triumphant, not amused, just warm enough to unbalance him. "I'm glad," she said. Her voice held no judgment, no smugness, only sincerity. And that sincerity, more than anything, shook him. He wasn't used to someone showing care without expecting something in return. He wasn't used to being tended to, even in small ways. She stepped back toward the door. "I'll send the summary in an hour." He He watched her hand reach for the handle, and a question stirred inside him, slow and unfamiliar. Why did her opinion of him matter? Why did the idea of disappointing her sit heavier than it should have? As she left, the office felt different again. Not darker, not lighter, just shifted. The air carried a subtle warmth he couldn't name, a warmth he wasn't sure he had the right to want. He leaned back in his chair, breathing out slowly. Why did it matter what she thought of him? And why did that question feel like the start of something he wasn't ready to face? "Is that the man you want to be?" she asked quietly. The words hung in the air between them, soft but solid, like a stone dropped into still water. They rippled through Ethan before he could pull his defenses back in place. A few minutes earlier, the conference room had been full. Glass walls, dark wood table. The city spread out beyond the windows like a restless map. His leadership team sat in their usual spots, laptops open, eyes tense. A chart glowed on the wall screen, numbers falling where they should have climbed. "Someone explain this?" Ethan had said, his tone clipped, hushed glances, shuffled papers. No one spoke until a young analyst at the far end of the table cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward," he'd begun, voice unsteady. "We underestimated the impact of the supplier change. You thought Ethan had cut in, the word hitting the table like a dropped weight. You thought he'd leaned forward, the veins in his hand visible as he gripped the edge of the table. Do you understand how many millions are on that screen? Because you didn't know the room had gone colder." The young man's face had flushed a painful red. He'd stared at his notes, jaw clenched, words dying in his throat. Ethan had kept going, not because he wanted to hurt him, but because that's what pressure did. It narrowed his focus into a sharp edge. "This isn't a classroom, Ben," he'd said. "We don't get to experiment with guesses and hope no one notices. If you can't handle that, you shouldn't be in this room." Out of the corner of his eye, he'd seen Maya. She sat near the middle of the table, pen resting on her notebook, eyes lifted to him. She hadn't flinched. She just watched, her expression steady but different, less impressed, more concerned. The meeting had limped on after that. People talked about corrective plans. No one looked at Ben. No one looked at Ethan for long either. When it ended, chairs scraped back, murmurs rose, and the team scattered. Maya stayed seated. He gathered his notes, pretending not to notice her. When he stepped into the hallway, she followed. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice low but clear. He stopped outside his office door, hand on the knob. "Yes, we should talk," she said, privately. Something in her tone, calm, unwavering, pushed past his instinct to brush her off. He exhaled through his nose and opened the door, gesturing for her to enter. The door clicked shut behind them, muting the sound of the office. She stood near the small round table by the window, not crossing her arms, not shrinking back, just waiting. He tossed the folder onto his desk. "If this is about rescheduling, handle it with grace. I'm not—" "It's about the meeting," she said. He turned fully then. "What about it?" She held his gaze, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. Most people looked away when he was wound tight like this. She didn't. "You humiliated him," she said softly. His jaw worked. He made a costly mistake. He did. She agreed. And he needed to be held accountable. "But you didn't just correct him. You cut him down in front of everyone. He has to learn," Ethan said. The words felt automatic, like a script he'd been handed years ago. This is how the real world works. Maya studied him for a long, quiet moment. "Maybe," she said, "but there's more than one way to be real." He felt a flicker of heat rise in his chest. "Are you suggesting I go easy on people? I'm suggesting you decide what kind of man you want to be when things go wrong," she replied. There it was again, that calm, that unflinching honesty that somehow hurt more than shouting ever could. He moved behind his desk, kneading the barrier. "You're my assistant, Ms. Lewis, not my conscience." Her eyes softened, but she didn't retreat. "I'm not trying to be your conscience." "Then what are you trying to be?" His voice came out harder than he intended. "Honest," she said, "for your sake and theirs." He didn't answer, couldn't for a moment. Her words pressed against something beneath the surface, a place he didn't visit often if ever. She took a step closer to the desk, her tone dropping even lower. "You know they're afraid of you," she said. "That's one kind of power. But there's another kind. The kind that makes people want to follow you, not just obey you." He felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. "Fear gets results. So does respect," she said. "And respect tends to last longer." There it was, the tension he couldn't quite name. It wasn't that she disagreed with him. Plenty of people had done that over the years. It was that she did it without trying to win, without trying to save face. She spoke like someone who had nothing to prove, and somehow that made her words hit deeper. He looked past her, out the window, watching a yellow cab crawl down the street 12 floors below. "You think I was wrong, I think," she said gently. "You were harder on him than you needed to be." He swallowed. His throat felt dry. "You don't know what it's like to carry this responsibility." She studied him, eyes searching his face. "You're right," she said. "I don't know what it's like to be in your exact chair, but I do know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that kind of moment. And I know it leaves marks." He flinched, just barely. Her words brushed too close to memories he kept buried, sharp exchanges at dinner tables, sharp eyes measuring his every misstep, sharp comments that stayed lodged in his mind for years. He pushed them down, like he always did. She seemed to sense something shift, but she didn't press. She just stood there, present, giving him room he wasn't sure what to do with. "Is that the man you want to be?" she asked again, softer this time. "The one who leaves marks like that." For a split second, something inside him cracked open. He saw himself the way she must have seen him in that meeting, voice raised, jaw tight, eyes cold. He saw the young analyst shrinking, the rest of the team holding their breath. He saw a man he'd sworn long ago he would never become. And he felt tired, bone deep tired. Tired of the hardness, the distance, the way every mistake around him seemed to turn into a battlefield. He wanted to say so. God, for a moment, he almost did. The words rose, heavy and unfamiliar. "I'm tired of myself, tired of being this way." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked away, reaching for the safety of his chair. "We're done here," he said, but the edge in his voice had dulled. Maya didn't move immediately. When he glanced back, she was still watching him, not with contempt, not with triumph, but with something else, something that looked dangerously like concern. "I'm not against you, Ethan," she said quietly. The sound of his first name in her voice sent another tremor through him. "I'm just asking you to look at yourself," she continued, "the way the rest of us have to." He couldn't hold her gaze. Not right then. She turned toward the door, her steps unhurried, her presence lingering even as she reached for the handle. Before she opened it, she paused. "If you want to talk about it," she said, not quite looking back, "I'll be here." The door opened with a soft click, then closed behind her, leaving him alone with the echo of her question. Was she judging him, or was she, somehow, trying to understand him? He honestly didn't know. And that uncertainty unsettled him more than any quarterly loss ever had. The building hummed with nighttime silence when Maya returned for her scarf. The sound was low and steady, the kind of quiet that made every footstep echo down the empty hallway. Ethan heard the elevator doors slide open and lifted his eyes from the stack of papers he'd been pretending to read. She stepped out, her coat draped over one arm, her hair slightly loosened from the long day. She hadn't expected anyone to still be there. That much was clear from the soft surprise in her expression when she saw him through the glass walls of his office. "I left my scarf," she said through the open door, lifting the corner of a burgundy knit dangling from her hand. Didn't want to freeze walking home. He stood too quickly, as if pulled by something. "It's late." She gave a small smile. "I noticed." He nodded toward the break room. "Do you want tea before you go? The water's still hot." She hesitated just long enough for him to wonder if he'd crossed a line. Then she nodded. "Tea sounds good." They walked together down the dim hallway. The break room felt different at night, warmer somehow. The fluorescent lights turned low, the city glowing beyond the window like a sky scattered with embers. Maya set her scarf on the counter, while Ethan reached up to the cabinet for the mint tea bags he rarely offered to anyone. He filled the kettle, neither of them speaking at first. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt gentle. "You work too much," she said softly as she watched the water heat. He shrugged. "I don't know what else to do with myself at night." She nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "When my marriage was falling apart, I did the same, stayed late, cleaned the kitchen twice, rearranged drawers no one touched." Her voice carried a quiet ache. "At least that work didn't look through me." He turned to her slowly. "You were married 17 years, she said. "I was 21 when we met, young enough to think being needed was the same thing as being seen." The kettle clicked softly. Ethan poured the hot water into 2 mugs and slid one across the table to her. She wrapped her hands around it, warming her fingers. He wasn't unkind. She continued, just distant. "I spent years being the background to his life, not angry, not resentful, just invisible." She looked down at the steam rising between them. It's a strange kind of loneliness. Being alone is one thing. Being unseen is another. Ethan felt something pinch at his chest, quiet but sharp. "I'm sorry," he said. And this time, the words came easily. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I learned from it. I learned that being overlooked can break things inside you that take years to rebuild." He swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. The room seemed smaller now, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet between them. "What about you?" she asked gently. "Anyone waiting for you at home?" He almost laughed, but it came out closer to a breath. "No, it's just me." She nodded once, as if she already suspected. "Family. A brother I barely speak to," he said. "And my mother. She's older now. Her health hasn't been great." Maya shifted her mug. "That must be hard." He nodded. "It is. She used to be strong, sharp. Now she forgets things. Gets confused." His voice dropped. "I'm not good at knowing how to help." Maya didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it breathe, allowed him to sit with the truth he rarely shared aloud. "My father passed when I was 30, she said after a moment. "Watching him fade was harder than I expected, harder than I wanted to admit, even to myself." He looked at her again. Really looked this time. There was a softness to her expression he hadn't noticed before, a fragile courage in the way she shared her past, without hiding behind humor or bitterness. They sat at the small break room table, 2 mugs between them, 2 people who had learned how to survive in different kinds of loneliness. The city lights flickered below, stretching for miles. "I didn't mean to be so harsh earlier," he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could reconsider. "In the meeting, pressure gets to me." "I know," she said quietly, "and I wasn't trying to attack you. I know." He paused. "But you weren't wrong." Her face softened. "I wasn't trying to be right. I was trying to reach you." The admission sank into him like warm water seeping into cold ground. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "You said something earlier about leaving marks." She nodded. "I've spent years trying not to become someone I knew growing up," he said, his voice lower now. "But sometimes the old habits, they show up anyway." She studied him a long, careful look, not prying, not judgmental, just present. "You look like a man carrying too much," she said gently. The words hit him deeper than he was prepared for. Something in his chest shifted, almost painfully. He felt exposed not in a humiliating way, but in a way that recognized a part of him he tried to hide even from himself. He lowered his gaze to his hands. "Maybe," her voice softened more, You don't always have to. He didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever said it to him before. He felt the air move differently between them, the night pressing in closer, intimate in ways he didn't understand yet. He looked up, and for once, didn't look away. The kettle clicked again, settling into silence. Why did he suddenly want to tell her everything, the things he'd buried, the fears he never named, the exhaustion he'd worn like armor for so long? The question hovered inside him, growing heavier with each breath, waiting for an answer he wasn't ready to give. He heard the whisper before he saw Maya's forced smile. The sound slipped through the low murmur of the restaurant, thin but sharp enough to cut through the clatter of silverware and polite laughter. Ethan turned slightly, catching only the tail end of Tom's comment, but it was enough. "Smart woman," Tom murmured to another board member, swirling his wine. "But not the image we want up front." The words settled like dust on polished wood, quiet, ugly, hard to sweep away. Maya didn't flinch at first. She simply straightened the hem of her blazer, eyes fixed on the menu as though the printed lines could anchor her. But Ethan saw the small shift in her shoulders, a tightening. A quiet retreat into herself. She'd heard every word. He stood beside her, close enough to feel the change in her breath, close enough to do something, say something. Anything but his body went still, rigid the way it always did when cruelty sounded too familiar. The restaurant around them glowed in soft amber light. Polished tables, linen napkins, polished silver, everything perfectly arranged for cameras, clients, reputation, and somehow that made the comment worse. It fit too easily into the world he'd built. Maya looked up at him then, offering a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ready to sit?" she asked. He nodded, though his throat felt tight. They moved toward the long dining table. Waiters glided past with trays of wine. The low hum of conversation surrounded them, but Ethan felt none of it, only the echo of that single sentence looping in his head. Words he'd heard, versions of his entire life. Be sharp, Ethan, be clean, be polished, be perfect. People judge what they see first. Never give them softness to poke at. His mother's voice, crisp as frost. Tom's comment had landed exactly where those old teachings lived. And the worst part, maybe the part he hated most, was how quickly his body responded with silence instead of defense. They took their seats. Maya lowered herself gracefully, but her hands stayed clasped in her lap, knuckles pale against the dim candlelight. He cleared his throat. "The sea bass is good here." She nodded. "I'm sure it is." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the thin layer beneath it, the part trying not to tremble. He despised himself for staying silent. But the moment had passed, and the conversation at the table folded over them like a wave, pulling them along. Tom leaned back in his chair, smiling broadly as if nothing had happened. "Ethan, good turnout tonight. Glad you brought your assistant. Shows confidence in your team." "She's more than an assistant," Ethan said before he could stop himself. Tom chuckled. "Sure. Good attitude, though." Something inside Ethan twisted. Maya's eyes flicked to him for a brief second, not hopeful, not grateful, just assessing, taking measure of him, of what he would or wouldn't say next. He wished he didn't know exactly what she was thinking. The conversation moved on. Numbers, markets, projections. But Maya spoke less than usual. She answered when addressed, with her calm professionalism untouched, but she didn't join the flow. Her shoulders remained slightly lifted, as if bracing for another blow. The candles flickered along the table, shadows swaying against the white walls. Ethan watched her in those shifting lights, seeing the steadiness he admired now wrapped in quiet hurt. And all of it because he hadn't stepped in. Because a part of him had gone still. Old training, old fears, old shame. He tried to focus on what the client across from him was saying, but the words blurred. His gaze kept drifting back to Maya, her polite expression, her slight nods, the way she avoided meeting Tom's eyes entirely. When dessert arrived, she excused herself to the restroom. Ethan watched her walk away, a tightness forming in his chest that felt too much like regret. When she disappeared around the corner, He pushed back from the table as if compelled by something stronger than impulse. He found her near the hallway leading to the restrooms, standing still, her hand resting against the wall. Her eyes were closed, not in frustration, not in tears, but in a quiet effort to steady herself. "Maya," he said softly. She opened her eyes, her expression smoothed over quickly. Too quickly. "I needed a moment." "I know," he said. I heard him. A small pause. "Yes, I should have." He stopped, the words tangling painfully. "I should have said something." She studied him for a beat, and he could feel the weight of her silence pressing against him. "It wasn't your comment," she said quietly. "He's responsible for his own words, but I was responsible for mine." Ethan answered, her expression softened, but only slightly. "You froze." "I did." "You looked conflicted," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. Not indifferent, not cruel, just caught between two places. He exhaled shakily. Maya held his gaze steady, searching. "I wasn't expecting you to fight my battles." "Ethan?" "I'm used to comments like that." He felt the sentence like a bruise forming beneath his ribs. She continued, even softer now. "But I did expect you not to let silence be the answer." Her words weren't sharp. They were worse, they were honest. He swallowed. "You're right." For the first time that evening, emotion flickered openly across her face. Hurt. Not anger. Not disappointment. Hurt. Plain and quiet. She looked away, her breathing shallow. "I worked hard to be here, to be seen from my mind, not judged for how I look. I thought this place, with you, would be different." He felt the ground shift under him, an old instinct rising, the instinct to retreat behind control, behind cool distance. But something held him in place. "Maya," he began. She shook her head slightly, not to dismiss him, but to steady herself. She met his eyes again, and for the first time, he didn't see steadiness. He saw the wound, and he felt, deep and undeniable, that he'd caused it. Her voice was barely audible. "Can you undo the damage?" The question lingered between them, trembling in the dim hallway light, more fragile, more honest than anything she'd asked him before. He had no answer, not yet, but the ache in his chest told him he needed to find one. "Your silence said enough," she whispered. The words hung between them like a thin string pulled too tight, ready to snap. They stood in the quiet hallway outside the conference room, the echo of departing footsteps still fading down the corridor. Evening light washed through the glass walls, casting long stripes across the floor. Ethan felt the air shift the same way it did before a storm. Only this one wasn't made of thunder or rain. It was made of truth. "Maya," he said carefully, his voice lower than usual. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't agree with him." "I know," she said, not unkindly, "but you didn't disagree either." Her eyes lifted to his, calm, steady, but wounded in a way he couldn't ignore. It was a look that didn't accuse. It simply reflected the moment back at him, without embellishment or protection. He took a breath. "It wasn't about you." She nodded once. "I'm aware," but something in her voice told him she was aware of far more than he wanted her to be. A group of employees passed by, laughing lightly, unaware of the gravity lingering between them. Maya stepped back, giving them space, her expression smoothing into something unreadable. When the hallway emptied again, she turned to him with a distance he hadn't felt, before a careful space she built, brick by brick. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly, "but I need you to understand something. Silence. It's a choice. And in rooms like that, it speaks louder than the insult." He swallowed, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. "I know. But do you?" she asked softly. "Because I'm not angry, just tired." He watched her. The way her shoulders dropped just a fraction. The way her breath left her like someone who'd held too much for too long. "Maya," he said again, stepping closer. "I'm trying." She gave him a gentle smile then, one that hurt more than any criticism could. "I never asked you to try. I just needed you to be there." He opened his mouth to respond, but she turned slightly, as if ending the conversation without fully walking away. And that, somehow, felt worse. They returned to the office in silence. The evening lights flickered on overhead, soft and cool, and the hum of the building at night felt louder than usual. Maya moved through her tasks with her usual precision, updating schedules, finalizing reports, coordinating calls, but she kept a subtle, consistent distance. Not rude, not cold, just gone. Ethan felt the absence immediately. He felt it in the quiet between sentences when she spoke to him. He felt it when she handed him a folder without lingering the way she used to. He felt it when she avoided standing too close, as though proximity itself now held weight. Every small detail reminded him of the shift, the soft turning of her body away, the calm professionalism that now had no warmth beneath it. He sat at his desk long after she'd returned to her own. His emails blurred in front of him. His mind replayed that single sentence again and again. Your silence said enough. He leaned back, rubbing his forehead, feeling the familiar throb just behind his eyes. Yet the headache wasn't from work, or stress, or the long day. It was from the realization creeping through him like cold water. He was losing her, and she wasn't even his to lose. When the office finally emptied, the building settling into its nighttime quiet, he stayed another hour, pretending to work while his gaze drifted toward her desk. When Maya eventually packed up her things, she paused only to say a polite, "Good night, Mr. Ward." Not Ethan, not the soft tone she once used. A formal distance he'd earned through a single unspoken moment. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. She slipped out quietly, the glass door whispering shut behind her. The silence she left behind felt heavier than the room itself. He stared at his monitor, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He didn't want to go home. He didn't want to sit alone with the echo of her words. So he did the one thing he hadn't done in years. He tried to write an apology. The cursor blinked in the empty email window as he typed, slowly, painfully, "Maya. I should have defended you. I should have spoken up. I'm sorry for the way I handled it." He paused. His chest tightened. He continued, "You deserve better from me. You always have." The words felt wrong, too exposed, too close to what he was afraid to admit that she mattered in ways he wasn't ready to confess. He deleted the email, started again. "I regret how I handled the situation." Deleted that too. He wrote 4 drafts. He deleted all of them. Not because he didn't mean them. He meant every word more than he wanted to, but because vulnerability felt like stepping onto cracking ice, unsure which part might give way beneath him. In the end, he closed the laptop. The apology stayed unwritten. He sat in the dim office, the quiet pressing in from all sides. The lamp on his desk cast a small circle of light, leaving the rest of the room in shadows. It felt fitting somehow that the only light in the room was the one he didn't know how to extend toward her. He leaned back, exhaling softly, staring at the ceiling. The distance was growing, not because of the insult, but because of the way he'd tried to pretend it didn't wound her. He closed his eyes. Would she pull away completely? He wasn't sure, but the fear settling in his chest told him he couldn't let it happen. Not again. Not this time. Her cardigan was folded on the chair beside the letter. Ethan stopped in the doorway, the hallway light behind him casting a long shadow across the empty office. Maya's desk, usually neat, warm in its own subtle way, felt strangely hollow without her presence. The soft gray cardigan she always kept for cold mornings lay quietly on the chair, sleeves tucked in as though someone had placed it there with care, not haste. His gaze fell to the envelope on the desk. It had his name on it. He walked toward it slowly, as if approaching something fragile, something that might shatter under the wrong movement. The building was silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC. Yet he felt the quiet inside himself more acutely, the kind that rang in the chest. the kind that signaled something had already slipped away. He picked up the letter. The paper was thick, the handwriting steady. She'd written his name with calm precision. He opened the envelope with a care that surprised even him, sliding the single folded page free. Ethan, thank you for the opportunity to contribute here. This environment no longer feels like a place where I can stay. I step away with respect for your work and gratitude for what I've learned. Maya. He read it again, then a third time. The words were elegant, restrained, and final. No blame, no anger, no explanation beyond what mattered. He felt something tighten in his throat, sharp and unexpected. It wasn't just the content of the letter, it was the tone. It was the way she had folded her cardigan, the way everything at her desk looked completed, resolved, like a door quietly closed. He sank slowly into her chair, the letter still in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the edge of the page. This wasn't about losing an assistant. He had lost assistants before, dozens over the years. This felt nothing like that. He stared at the organized desk drawers she'd meticulously arranged over the past 2 weeks. The soft touch she'd added to the office, the small vase of eucalyptus on the corner, the discreet placement of the desk lamp to reduce glare, the clean alignment of documents she insisted on. He hadn't realized how much of her had filtered into the room until all of it suddenly felt like remnants. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and memories rose, unbidden moments he hadn't allowed himself to dwell on while they were happening. Her laugh in the break room, low and warm. The way her voice softened when she talked about her aging mother. The sudden brightness in her expression whenever she solved a problem others overlooked. Her calm, unwavering gaze the night she returned for her scarf. And the way she had said, "Silence is a choice." He opened his eyes again. The weight on his chest felt like a stone pressing deeper with each second. He folded the letter carefully, placing it back on the desk, then pressed a hand to his forehead. He had pushed her away by doing nothing, said more with what he withheld than with what he ever spoke. He replayed the moment in the restaurant, the careless comment from the board member, the insult that cut deeper than anyone else noticed. Maya had looked at him, waiting, hoping, maybe even needing him to stand beside her, and he froze. Not out of cruelty, not out of agreement, but out of old conditioning, that familiar tightening of his jaw, the instinct to appear unaffected, rigid, composed. His mother's voice echoing in his mind like a harsh metronome, drilling in lessons she once believed would protect him. Appear strong. Don't react. Don't show softness. Don't show preference. He had mistaken silence for control. Maya had taken it for truth. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing both hands over his face. "I should have said something," he muttered, his voice cracking in the empty room. "Why didn't I say something?" The office swallowed his question whole. He stood abruptly, pacing once, twice, then stopping in front of the large window overlooking the city. Cars moved far below, tiny streams of light weaving through the streets, while the sky was smeared with the remains of dusk. Everything looked alive out there. In here, he felt nothing but stillness. He turned back toward her desk. The cardigan on the chair caught his eye again. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over the soft fabric. It still held a faint trace of her lavender. Maybe, or something warm he couldn't quite name. "Maya," he whispered, almost as if she might still be nearby. But the room stayed quiet. He felt a sharp ache in his chest, the kind that came when grief arrived before he fully recognized it. The resignation letter crinkled slightly in his hand, and he stared at her neat handwriting again. "I don't want this to end," he said aloud. The words felt strange in his mouth, raw, vulnerable, untouched by the usual armor he wore. They slipped out before he could stop them. Before he could rebuild the walls she'd slowly taken apart over days and conversations. And he realized then painfully, honestly, that he meant it. He didn't want whatever existed between them to fade quietly. He didn't want her to walk away believing he didn't care. He didn't want to go back to the cold version of himself he'd carried like a shield for years. But He also knew one thing with chilling clarity. This was his fault, and it might already be too late to fix. He let out a long breath, looking around the dim office, the flickering city lights reflecting faintly off the glass walls. Would he fight for her, or would he slip back into familiar habits, silence, distance, emotional retreat until the memory of her became another ache he hid behind his perfect composure? He didn't know, not yet. But the thought of letting her go, truly go, filled him with a quiet dread he couldn't ignore anymore. He gripped the back of her chair, leaning forward slightly, the letter still in his other hand. The room felt as if it were waiting for him, asking him what kind of man he would be next. He looked at the folded cardigan again. Something inside him stirred. Was this the moment he finally changed, or would he watch her walk away for good? The question hung in the air, unanswered, heavy, and unbearably real. The lakeside cabin smelled like sawdust and old winters. Ethan pushed the door open with a slow, almost hesitant motion. The hinges creaked in the familiar way they always had, that low groan echoing through the quiet space. The air inside felt untouched, as though time had preserved everything exactly as he left it. The woven rug near the hearth, the dented coffee table his father once built, the stack of firewood that still carried faint traces of pine sap. He closed the door behind him and stood still, listening to the silence settle. The lake outside whispered against the shore, steady and indifferent, a place unchanged, while he felt as if he'd been turned inside out. He set his phone on the counter, face down, no notifications. Of course not. He shrugged off his coat and placed it over the back of a chair, then ran a hand through his hair. The cabin had always been a refuge and a mirror, comforting in its simplicity, relentless in its honesty. Here, there was nowhere to hide from himself. He walked to the window overlooking the water. The glass was slightly fogged from the difference in temperature. He wiped it with his sleeve, revealing a view he hadn't seen in months, the lake low and wide, darkening under an early evening sky, rippling gently with the cold breeze, the kind of scene that always brought his father peace. He wished it did the same for him now. He sat on the edge of the old couch, elbows on his knees, and let the weight of the past days crash down. He saw the moment again, the dinner, the careless comment, Maya's eyes shifting toward him, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to choose her, even in a small, human way. He had done nothing, and she had walked away without a word. He leaned back, closing his eyes. For a moment, he felt 12 again, sitting on this same couch, bracing for his mother's criticisms. Stand straighter, eat less, think sharper. Don't show weakness, don't show preference, don't show softness. Always tightening, always correcting, always trying to be the man she demanded he become. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling beams. "You did a number on me," he whispered into the quiet, his voice shaking. "And I let you." The admission hit him with unexpected force. He pressed a hand to his chest and exhaled slowly, as though something lodged inside him had begun to loosen. He rose and walked toward the small kitchen nook, where an old tin kettle sat on the stove. He filled it with water, set it on the burner, and waited for the flame to catch. The soft blue glow flickered, casting quiet light across the counters. He leaned against the sink, gripping the edge. Why had Maya gotten under his skin so deeply? So quickly? It wasn't her efficiency, or her intelligence, or even her calm. It was the way she moved through the world, without shrinking something he didn't know how to do. It was the way she had looked at him, not with judgment, but with expectation, like she believed he could be better than the version of himself he protected so fiercely. And he had let her believe that right up until he proved her wrong. The kettle began to hum. He turned off the flame and poured the water into a chipped mug, watching the steam rise. He remembered the hurt on her face. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet disappointment. A closing door. He set the mug down and braced both hands on the counter. His chest tightened with an ache he couldn't ignore anymore. "Maya," he whispered, just her name, as if saying it might bring clarity. But it only deepened the ache. He moved to the small desk near the back window, his father's old writing spot. The lamp there still worked. Its warm yellow glow filled the corner with soft light. He sat down heavily and pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer. He knew he needed to say something to her, needed to try, needed to break the silence that had cost him too much already. But the pen hovered over the page, unmoving, so he spoke instead. "I was wrong," he murmured into the quiet. "I hurt you. You mattered." The words trembled out of him, unfamiliar and raw. He tried again, firmer this time. "You matter." A flicker of something moved through him. Fear, yes, but also release. He took a deeper breath, feeling the air settle in his lungs. He closed his eyes and pictured her face, the way her brow softened when she listened, the way her voice steadied him without trying. He imagined her standing in front of him again, just long enough to hear him say what he'd never had the courage to say before. "I'm sorry." The words landed inside him like stones dropping into a still lake, heavy, honest, irreversible. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his forehead with the heel of his hand. His father used to say the cabin was a place where truth sounded louder. Tonight, it felt deafening. He lifted his phone from the counter where he left it, turning it over in his hand. The screen lit up, no messages. He stared at her name in his contacts. His thumb hovered over it for several seconds. But he didn't press it. Not yet. Not like this. He wasn't calling to demand or convince or cajole. He wasn't calling to plead or justify his silence. He was calling to tell her the truth. And that meant he had to find the courage to speak without armor, without distance, without the man he had been taught to be. He inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. He picked up the phone again. "I'll tell her everything," he whispered to the empty room. He felt the decision settle through him, steady and sure. But a question lingered in the quiet, tightening around his heart. Would she even pick up the phone? He didn't know, but tomorrow he would try. Even if his voice shook, even if she didn't answer, even if the world he built cracked open for good. He set the phone down gently, listening to the rain beginning outside, soft, steady, like the first release after a long-held storm. Tomorrow. He hoped it wasn't already too late. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar softness in his voice. Maya froze where she stood halfway between the kitchen counter and the small round table by the window. The late afternoon light slanted in, a muted gold that touched the phone screen and made it glow a little too warmly for what she expected to hear from him. She picked it up, thumb brushing the edge, and saw his name. A voicemail. Just one, left 2 minutes ago. She hadn't expected anything. Not after the dinner, not after the silence that followed. She thought whatever thread had connected them had already frayed past saving, but her hand trembled slightly as she pressed play. His voice came through in a low, unsteady breath so unlike the controlled, measured tone she'd grown used to. "Maya, it's me. He paused, and the silence on the line seemed to pull her whole body taut. "I'm not even sure where to start, but I didn't want you to walk away thinking my silence meant indifference. It didn't. It never did." She closed her eyes. He continued, softer this time. "I'm trying to be a better version of myself than the one you saw. I know I fell short. I'm sorry. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. No expectations, just honesty." Another pause, brief, but full. "You deserved more than what I gave you that night." Then the line clicked off. Maya stood there, letting the room fall quiet again, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She pressed the phone to her chest without thinking, as though the physical nearness could steady her. She replayed it, not the whole message, just the first 10 seconds. The way he had said her name, the way the words didn't sound practiced, the hesitancy, the truth threading through the edges. She listened again and again. By the 4th time, she sank slowly into the chair by the window, the cushion dipping beneath her. The world outside felt muted. The street below was lined with bare November trees, their branches trembling against a pale sky. A couple walked past in heavy coats, leaning slightly toward each other to share warmth. She watched them with a quiet ache. She knew better than to trust too easily. Her last marriage had taught her how thin the line could be between affection and invisibility. She had spent years offering grace to a man who no longer saw her, then blamed herself for not being smaller, quieter, softer. She wouldn't repeat that mistake. But Ethan, he hadn't sounded like a man trying to pull her back into old patterns. He sounded like someone fumbling towards something honest, something he wasn't used to giving, maybe wasn't even sure he was capable of offering. She rubbed her palms together slowly. Her breath came out shaken, but steady enough to hold. The voicemail hovered in her mind, his quiet sincerity, his unguarded pauses, the vulnerability he probably hated exposing, and the truth she'd felt for weeks but never said out loud. He mattered more than she had intended. That realization stung. She set the phone on the table and walked to the kitchen sink, letting cold water run over her fingers. The chill grounded her, gave her something real to hold on to, while her thoughts tangled and untangled themselves. Was she ready to open the door even a little to hear him try to risk the ache of disappointment all over again? She shut off the water and leaned on the counter, staring at her reflection in the darkened microwave door. Her face looked tired, not worn out, just lived in, marked by years that had demanded strength. Her eyes were softer tonight, though, clouded with a fragile hope she wasn't sure she trusted. "I don't owe him this," she murmured under her breath. But even as she said it, she knew the choice wasn't about owing. It was about wanting. She walked back to her phone and picked it up once more. Her thumb hovered over his name. She imagined him somewhere alone, probably rehearsing words he'd never tried to say before. She thought of the way he had looked at her, sometimes conflicted, guarded, unexpectedly gentle, as if she saw parts of him he wasn't sure he wanted seen. She swallowed, the decision pressing against her ribs. She unlocked the screen, opened the message window, typed nothing. Her thumb hovered. Dignity mattered. Self-respect mattered. But so did not running from something that felt real. She closed her eyes, breathed in slowly, and let the breath out in one long, steady exhale. Her fingers moved before she could talk herself out of it. Where? She stared at the word, small but heavy, glowing on the screen. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't even a promise. It was an opening, a crack in the wall she'd built, a place for truth to step in if he dared. Her pulse quickened as she pressed send. The message left her phone with a quiet swoop, almost too gentle for the magnitude of what she'd just chosen. She placed the phone on the table again, but her gaze stayed fixed on it. The apartment had grown too silent, too watchful. She could hear her own breathing, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the echo of his voice in her mind. What truth was he trying to show her, and was she ready to see it? The phone remained still, silent, waiting, just like she was. Ethan waited barefoot on the porch, autumn wind stirring his hair. The boards beneath his feet were cold, worn smooth by years of storms and solitude. He had stood there for nearly 20 minutes, hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans, watching the gravel road curve toward the lake. The sun had dipped low, its last gold spilling across the water like a promise he didn't dare trust. When Maya's car finally appeared between the thinning trees, his breath caught too sharp, too hopeful. Headlights swept across the porch, then clicked off. For a moment, she didn't move. He could see the faint outline of her through the windshield, still as if gathering herself. He didn't blame her. He wasn't sure he had gathered himself either. She stepped out slowly, her dark sweater fluttering with the wind, her curls lifting at the edges. She closed the car door gently, almost quietly, as though sound itself might shatter the fragile decision she'd made to come. He swallowed hard. "Thank you for being here." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept over the cabin, its chipped paint, the old rocking chair, the porch light that flickered like it wasn't fully convinced of its job. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, You said you wanted honesty, she said softly. He nodded, his chest tight. I do. Maya stepped closer, the porch creaking under her weight. She stopped just a few feet away, her arms folded not defensively, more like she needed to hold herself together. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and cold water from the lake. He cleared his throat, feeling the words he had practiced collapse into something unsteady. I should start with the truth I've avoided for a long time. She waited, her face calm but cautious. My silence that night, it wasn't about you. He paused, fighting the instinct to retreat behind the sharp edges he used to rely on. It was about old patterns I didn't even realize still controlled me. Her breath stirred, almost imperceptibly. My mother had this way of making you feel like flaws were disasters, he continued. Weight, emotions, softness, anything she couldn't control. She treated them like failures. I didn't think it shaped me, but it did, more than I want to admit. His voice wavered on the last word. He looked down at the porch boards for a moment, grounding himself. When Tom said what he said, I froze. Not because I agreed, but because some old part of me reverted. And you saw that. You saw me at my worst. Maya's jaw tightened, just slightly hurt. Remembered. He lifted his head again. And I hated that you saw it. Not because you judged me, but because I did. The air between them shifted warmer, heavier. I've spent years being the man who never flinches, never wavers, never lets anyone see a crack. It's lonely and exhausting. He exhaled shakily, and then you walked in and rearranged everything without even trying. Her eyes softened, though they glistened with something unshed. You were steady, he said, voice low, not intimidated, not impressed, just present, and it mattered. More than it should have. Maya looked away for a moment, toward the lake, where ripples caught the last thread of light. He stepped closer, not enough to intrude, but enough to bridge a fraction of the distance. I'm sorry for my silence, for my assumptions, for letting old fears speak louder than my intentions. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of leaves beginning to rot, the season turning. Maya, he said, her name trembling in his mouth. You deserved someone who stood up for you, not someone who hesitated because of ghosts. She blinked, and the first tear slipped free, sliding down her cheek with quiet dignity. Not dramatic, not angry, understanding. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't the comment that hurt me. She paused, steadying her breath. It was realizing you didn't know how much your voice could have changed it. His throat burned. She brushed her cheek with the back of her hand and inhaled deeply. I spent years being unseen. In my marriage, in my home, even by myself. When I left that life, I promised I'd never let myself shrink again. He flinched at the word shrink. She looked up, her eyes meeting his with quiet courage. I didn't expect you to defend me, but I hoped you'd see me. He did now, every piece of her. He took another step, slow, deliberate, letting her see the sincerity before she felt the nearness. I see you, Maya, and I'm sorry it took losing you to understand how much that mattered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The lake whispered, the trees rustled, the porch light flickered again like it was holding its own breath. Then she reached out hesitant at first, almost uncertain, and touched his hand. He felt it like a shock, a warmth he hadn't earned but desperately hoped he could honor. I didn't come here for perfection, she murmured. Her thumb brushed his knuckles, soft, steady. I came here for honesty. His heart tightened, painfully, as though bracing for impact. Is this forgiveness? He asked, voice cracking despite his best effort to steady it. She held his gaze, her eyes searching his face with a depth that made him feel more bare than the wind on his skin. I don't know yet, she whispered. Her hand lingered in his. But I'm here. Those 3 words held every possibility: hope, fear, beginning, or ending. and he didn't know which one she would choose. Not yet. Their first shared sunrise felt like a soft promise. Maya stood at the edge of the cabin's small porch, wrapped in a blanket Ethan had pressed into her hands before stepping back to give her space. The early light spread across the lake in a thin ribbon, pale pink deepening into gold. For a moment, she didn't speak, just breathed it in, quiet, slow, steady. Ethan watched her from behind, careful not to intrude on the stillness she seemed to need. Her shoulders rose and fell in a rhythm that soothed him more than he expected. It struck him how rare it was to witness someone simply being without performing, without guarding, and he wondered if she knew how much this calmness had already reshaped him. She finally turned, her expression soft but unreadable. Sunrises feel different here. He nodded. They always did. I forgot that. A faint smile tugged at her lips, and the sight of it eased something knotted deep inside him. They spent the next hour in a silence that wasn't heavy, just contemplative. When the full sun rose over the tree line, she lowered the blanket and met his eyes. "We should head back," she said quietly. He didn't ask what her expression meant. He didn't reach for more than she offered. Not today. Back in the city, life resumed, but not in the same shape it had before. They didn't rush anything. No confessions pressed too soon. No declarations neither was ready to hear. Instead, they settled into a rhythm that felt almost fragile in its simplicity. Morning coffee at a small shop 2 blocks from his office. Lunch breaks where they mostly talked about ordinary things, weather changes, favorite neighborhoods, the way late autumn always made them nostalgic. Sometimes they walked along the river after work, the cool air reminding them both that seasons moved whether hearts kept up or not. Ethan found himself slowing down during those walks, listening more, choosing words with intention instead of reflex. He noticed her sleeves brushing against her hands when she got nervous. She noticed the way he paused before every personal question, as if he had to unlock something inside before answering. It was slow. It was imperfect. But it felt real. Maya didn't return to work right away. She told him she needed time not to punish him, but to make sure she walked back into that office on her own terms. He respected that, though he missed her presence more than he admitted. He used that time to face things he had avoided. He met with his leadership team, listened instead of lectured, asked questions he never bothered asking before. He saw the way younger employees flinched when he walked by, and it hit him harder than expected. He wanted to be a man people didn't shrink around. One afternoon, he sat in his office, staring at the empty desk where Maya used to sit. Her small plant still rested by the window. She hadn't taken it with her. For weeks. He'd avoided moving it. Today, he touched one of the leaves, letting the smooth texture ground him. He wanted her to come back, but only if she felt respected. Late that evening, he sent her a simple message. "Take your time. Your space is here if and when you choose it." She didn't reply right away, and he didn't expect her to. A week later, she arrived at the office not during work hours, but early in the morning, when the halls were quiet and the lights still flickered awake. Ethan saw her through the glass wall of his office. She looked around slowly, as if deciding whether the air still held room for her. He stepped out, stopping several feet away. "Good morning." Her gaze softened. "I'm not sure how long I'll stay today." "That's all right," he said quietly. 1 hour or 1 step, it's your pace." Something in her eased, just a little. Over the next few days, she slowly reintegrated into her work, answering emails, reorganizing projects, interacting with colleagues. Ethan didn't hover, didn't insert himself, but he stayed available, present in a way he never used to be. And gradually, the office began to shift. People spoke to him without bracing first. Meetings felt less like battlefields, more like conversations. He caught himself breathing differently, slower, steadier. But the true test came unexpectedly. A board meeting, mid-November. The room smelled of old wood and expensive suits. Tom, the same man whose careless remark had sliced into Maya, sat 2 chairs away from Ethan, flipping through financial projections. When Maya presented her updates, Tom made a small, dismissive sound under his breath. Her role wasn't meant to handle this level of visibility, he murmured, not quietly enough. Old impulses surged in Ethan's chest. Silence, detachment, the urge to retreat behind ice. But the memory of Maya's hurt and his own cowardice burned through it. This time, he didn't hesitate. "She's exactly the person meant to handle it," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm enough to stop the room. "And her work speaks for itself." Tom's eyebrows shot up. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan leaned in, unshaken. "If anyone here needs clarity on her contributions, I'll walk you through them myself." The room was silent. Maya's breath caught, though she kept her eyes down. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was steady, unflinching, respectful. When the meeting ended, she lingered by the doorway, her eyes lifted to his, warm but cautious, fuller than they'd been in weeks. "You didn't have to do that," she said gently. "I know," he answered, "but I needed to." A long pause stretched between them, comfortable, uncertain, hopeful. "Ethan," she murmured, "are you becoming the man you want to be?" He let the question settle inside him, deeper than any praise or apology ever had. "I'm trying," he said, voice trembling with truth, "every day." And though she didn't smile, her eyes softened just enough to make him believe that effort mattered. Snow fell softly outside as Ethan placed 2 steaming mugs on the table. The cabin was warmer now than the night they first stood on that porch months ago. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth, sending flickers of amber light across the wooden walls. Maya sat curled up on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, watching the snowfall blur the edges of the pine trees outside. The scent of cinnamon drifted from the mugs, mingling with the smell of burning oak. "Careful," he said as he handed her one of them. "It's hotter than it looks." She smiled, lifting it with both hands, letting the warmth sink into her palms. "You've gotten better at this," she murmured. "Your early attempts were strong." He chuckled, settling beside her. "You mean terrible." She gave a tiny shrug, eyes glinting. "I was being polite." Their shoulders brushed lightly, and even after months of closeness, that small touch made something inside him settle, as if the world aligned itself for a moment. The cabin had become their halfway place between past and future, between fear and courage. They visited whenever life felt too loud or too heavy, using weekends and stolen evenings to rebuild something neither of them thought they'd get again. Maya leaned her head against the back of the couch. "I never thought I'd feel this kind of quiet again," she said softly. "Not the lonely kind, the peaceful kind." Ethan watched her carefully, noticing the subtle shift in her expression, the way the corners of her eyes softened when she allowed herself to relax fully. He had grown to read her small signals, those gentle cues she never spoke out loud. "I'm glad you do," he said. "I hoped you would." She sipped her drink, then set the mug down on the coffee table. Her gaze drifted to the window again, where the snow continued its steady fall. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "You've changed, really changed." He swallowed, not from discomfort, but from the weight of hearing those words. "I don't want to be who I was." "I know," she said quietly. He hesitated long enough that she turned her head toward him, brows knitting gently. "What is it?" He breathed in, steadying himself. He wasn't nervous, just thoughtful, aware of the importance of the next words. "I'm not going to ask you for anything grand," he began. "No promises you don't want, no future you're not ready for. But I want to build something with you. Not perfect, not rushed, just real." Her eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "I want," he continued slowly, "to share life with you, to stand beside you, not above, not behind, beside." Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in something warmer, deeper. He pressed on, voice unsteady but honest. "I want mornings with you, walks with you, quiet dinners, hard days, good days. I want the ordinary things, the things I never let myself want before." She looked at him for a long moment, so long he felt his heartbeat stumble. "Are you asking me to move in?" she finally asked. He almost laughed, but the moment was too tender for humor. "Not today. Not unless you want that today." He shook his head. "I'm asking if you'll build life with me, whatever pace feels right for you." Maya's lips parted slightly, as if she were letting the meaning settle inside her. She placed a hand gently on his knee, her touch steady, warm. "You know," she murmured, "when my marriage was ending, I promised myself I wouldn't ever choose someone out of hope alone. I wanted to choose someone because of actions, consistency." He felt his stomach tighten, not from fear, but from the vulnerability that always surfaced when she spoke so truthfully. "And you," she paused, her thumb brushing lightly against the fabric of his jeans. "You show up now, every day, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but deliberately." He breathed out slowly, the air leaving him with more weight than he realized he'd been holding. "That's enough," she said. His eyes stung unexpectedly, and he looked away for a moment, swallowing the emotion that pressed hard against his ribs. "So, is that a yes?" he asked quietly. She smiled, small, steady, radiant in its simplicity. "Yes, Ethan, it's a yes." Time seemed to slow around them. The fire crackled, the snow fell in silent sheets. The cabin felt like a cocoon, like a place built not of wood, but of second chances. He reached for her hand, not with the urgency he once held, but with the gentleness of a man who understood the fragility of trust. She threaded her fingers with his, squeezing once, firm and sure. They sat like that for a long while, watching snow gather on the porch, 2 steaming mugs forgotten on the table. The world outside disappeared into white, leaving only warmth, only the quiet promise of a future built with intention. After several minutes, Maya rested her head on his shoulder. "What do you think life is going to look like?" she asked softly. Ethan turned just enough to brush his cheek against her hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think, whatever it becomes, we'll build it together." She closed her eyes, absorbing his words in the steady rhythm of her breath, and though she didn't say anything else, the silence between them held possibility wide, hopeful, unfinished. What would their new beginning become? Neither of them knew, but for the first time, the uncertainty felt like home. The cabin porch had become their place, where silence felt like home. The late afternoon light spilled across the wooden planks in soft gold, turning the lake into a muted mirror of sky and water. Maya sat wrapped in a wool blanket, her hands cupped around a mug of chamomile tea. Ethan stepped outside, letting the screen door tap shut behind him, and lowered himself onto the bench beside her. She leaned subtly toward his shoulder, as if her body already knew the shape of his beside her. "Still your favorite hour?" he asked. She nodded, watching a pair of ducks ripple the water. "Still the one that makes the world feel manageable." He smiled, resting his arm along the backrest, close enough for warmth, but not crowding. They had learned each other's rhythms, when to speak, when to listen, and when the silence itself carried more meaning than any sentence. In the months since she'd said yes, life had settled into something neither of them had imagined, but both had quietly hoped for. Even their workdays, once marked by strain and emotional distance, had softened at the edges. Ethan no longer barked orders down hallways. He asked questions, paused for answers, and walked through the office with a steadiness people noticed. Meetings had shifted, to less posturing, more problem-solving. And Maya, now leading community outreach initiatives, had become a grounding presence not only for him, but for the entire company. One evening, after a difficult board session, Cheryl had pulled him aside with a smirk. "You're unrecognizable." You know that she'd said, "in a good way." He hadn't known how to respond then. He still didn't, even now, as he thought about it. Maya often reminded him change didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it was the sum of small choices made every day. He glanced at her now, noticing the faint lines near her eyes deepen as the breeze brushed her face. He loved those lines. They made her look like someone who had lived, survived, and continued anyway. "What's on your mind?" she asked without looking at him. He let out a slow breath. "Just us." "That sounds serious," she teased softly. "It's not heavy," he said. "Just real." She finally turned toward him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Real is good." He cleared his throat lightly. "Do you feel settled?" With everything, Maya studied his face for a moment. "Yes," she said gently. "More than I expected to be." He nodded, absorbing the words like warmth from the mug in her hands. A long moment passed before she spoke again. "You know," she said, "when I left my marriage, I thought I'd be alone forever. Not because I couldn't find someone, but because I didn't trust my heart to choose again." He turned slightly, giving her his full attention. "But you—" She pressed her lips together, her voice softening. "You didn't ask me to disappear into what you wanted. You didn't ask me to shrink. You asked me to stand beside you." She paused. "That's why I stayed." The words settled inside him, slow and steady. He knew he'd never fully undo the past, the strictness, the coldness, the inherited rules, but she had given him something he didn't know he deserved the chance to build a different way of living. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding across the water. Ethan leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "There's something I've been working on," he said. Maya raised a brow. "Should I be worried?" He smiled. "No, just patient." He pulled a small black notebook from his jacket pocket, the same kind he'd kept for years, filled with rules he'd carved into his days like stone. He flipped it open to the first page. The ink was fresh, the handwriting careful. She leaned closer, reading quietly. "Rule number 1, lead with respect, love with honesty." Her lips parted slightly, and she touched the page as if it were fragile. "You rewrote them, all of them," he said. "Most of them needed to go." Maya looked up at him, eyes shimmering with something warm and steady. "This is the real you, isn't it?" He nodded. "Or the me I'm trying to grow into." She closed the notebook gently, holding it between her palms. "You don't have to try alone." He felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight for years. "I know," he said. A quiet settled between them again, the kind that carried gratitude rather than uncertainty. Maya leaned into his side, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. He placed a hand over hers, thumb tracing small circles across her knuckles. Below them, the lake caught the last of the sun, turning the surface molten and still. The wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of pine and cooling earth. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked, then closed, the sound punctuating the quiet evening. "What do you think the next years will look like?" she asked. He thought about it, their shared mornings, the quiet routines, the life they were shaping piece by piece, the company growing under different leadership, her new programs reaching people who once felt invisible, the cabin waiting for them whenever the world became too loud. "I think," he said slowly, "they'll look like something we write together, not all at once, but one page at a time." She lifted her head just enough to meet his eyes. "Then, let's keep writing." He smiled, leaning his forehead gently against hers. The porch around them glowed in the final stretch of daylight, and the world felt both vast and intimate at once. What new life would they build from here? Neither of them could see that far ahead. But their beginning felt steady, honest, and beautifully unfinished. Sometimes, healing begins in the smallest moments, often the ones we almost overlook. A quiet conversation late at night. The courage to say I was wrong. The choice to stay open, even when everything in us wants to retreat back to the familiar. What Ethan and Maya remind us is that people don't really need perfection from one another. They need honesty, they need presence, and they need someone willing to unlearn the old rules that kept their hearts guarded for too long. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is let another person see who we are without all the armor, and trust that we won't be dismissed for it. And maybe the softest truth of all is this: it's never too late to grow into someone kinder, steadier, more willing to love well. Life keeps offering us chances to rewrite the parts of ourselves we thought were permanent. If you're carrying an old hurt tonight, may this story remind you that change can begin quietly, one honest word, one gentle step at a time, and that you deserve a kind of love that meets you where you are and stays. Thank you, truly, for spending your time with this story. Your presence here matters more than you know. These moments we share are what give the telling its meaning. If you feel this story brought a little warmth or reflection into your day, a like, a share, or a subscribe is a simple way to pass that kindness forward. Wishing you peace tonight and a gentle place for your heart to rest.